Okay, so a new One Punch Man chapter just dropped like an hour ago, and this chapter is called Squared, which is chapter 166. And to be honest, this chapter, I'll just say it straight up, I believe this chapter is my first 10 out of 10 chapter that I've dropped for One Punch Man in a while. I feel like last chapter just wasn't enough for me to, it wasn't enough to give a 10 out of 10 in my opinion. I feel like this chapter had the action, it had the emotion, the art, it just had everything. And there's no way I can't give it a 10 out of 10. But of course, before we get into the video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new, because if you can't already tell, I post a lot of One Punch Man content. If you like that, subscribe. If you don't. But apart from that, let's get into it. Now, this chapter starts off pretty much where we left off in the last chapter, with Garo approaching the S-Class heroes and the other heroes on the floor as he's emitting this crazy energy that is scaring everybody. Now, we see that Bang is facing Garo here, and he's not actually that affected by the energy that Garo is emitting, which I guess just goes to show how strong Bang is in his own right. And we see that Bang gets up and says give back Garo because he believes that God is controlling him, which I guess Garo says, he's not being controlled by God, but we kind of have to take that statement with a grain of salt, because we know that God, once he gives people powers, he does have control over their minds to some extent. Obviously, he has more control of others, for example, he has more control over someone like, I guess, Sage Centipede, rather than, for example, Homeless Emperor, because Homeless Emperor did have kind of his own will and his own consciousness, but Garo is kind of similar to Homeless Emperor in that sense, but others maybe less so. But moving on, we see Bang stand up and say give back Garo, and then we see a pretty big thing just happen straight up in this chapter, and Blast just appears on the battlefield. Like literally, Blast makes an entrance in this chapter, which I guess was, his entrance was a bit anticlimactic, if in my opinion. I feel like he just came out of nowhere, which I guess maybe because it's Blast, I was expecting maybe a bigger entrance, but that's besides the point. This is still really huge news, and we see that Blast says, I'm Blast, we can get into the gritty details later, you are being controlled by God. And Blast pretty much says that Garo's being controlled by God, etc, etc, and he says any attack you unleash whilst on this planet could endanger the very existence of all living things. Does that line up with what your actual goals are? And obviously he's talking to Garo, and Garo just pretty much smiles and says that, hey, divine power isn't bad at all, and that him being around means death. And basically he's trying to say he's finally the symbol of fear, which I guess kind of makes sense. But Blast before this says that his radiation, it's causing humans to literally collapse because they can't tolerate the cosmic radiation that he's emitting, which means he's pretty much just a danger to all civilization in general. So I'm not too sure if Garo can survive on Earth in this form, and we can pretty much guess at this point that Garo's probably like a god level threat with the things that he's doing and the things that he's causing on Earth. But then we move on, and Garo says that, he can't allow this. He's not going to be transported by Blast to a different dimension. And then we see that Bang tries to stand in Garo's way, and Garo says absolute evil doesn't need anyone to understand it. And Garo's thinking back to Tario, and he says he's going to finish off the old man right here, and he'll never see Tario again. And he says that's how it needs to be, for his sake as well. And then we see, I guess we shift our attention away from Garo, and we shift our attention to Monaco, and Monaco is running away from this, the whole fight, as she's bleeding from her eyes, and she stumbles across Tario. He's like face down on the floor and looks like he's bleeding from his face. But then we shift over back to the battlefield, and we see that Genos just straight up zooms at Garo and just slams into his stomach. But of course we see that this obviously doesn't affect Garo, because Garo is crazy strong at this point, and Genos is like literally half a body, he's just a torso. But then we see that Garo just takes off Genos from his body and holds him by his head, and he's as he's about to, I guess, finish off Genos, Blast goes in and uses a dimension cannon, showing off pretty much the first attack that we've seen Blast perform in the series. And of course, as we guessed, this is like a spatial dimensional type of attack. That's pretty much Blast's theme and how Blast fights throughout all of this fight that we're going to see right now. And we see that, you know, initially Garou dodges this, but then Blast uses like a dimension hole to send him back down to where he is in a comfortable position to then perform a gravity knuckle and slams Garou in the face. And then we see Garou then get sent back flying up, but then Blast then uses another like dimension hole to, you know, get him back into a convenient position to punch him again. And we see him just, you know, continuously do this and just pretty much kind of overwhelm Garou here, you could say. And we see that as Blast tries to shut the dimension to transfer Garou away from Earth, Garou manages to bypass this, and then he says, "I see how it is," and uses a nuclear fission gravity knuckle, which is pretty much, I guess, a combination of nuclear fission and, you know, Blast's ability, which is gravity knuckle. And he tries to overwhelm Blast with this, but Blast impressively manages to, I guess, you know, transport all of these attacks to the air, where they, you know, finally unleash, and it causes like a huge explosion in the air, which looks pretty cool. But then we see that Blast can also use like a black hole to absorb all of these attacks and send them to a different complete dimension, which looks pretty cool as well. But then we see Garou and Blast finally clash again, and Garou says, "I see now you're not S-Class rank 1 for nothing it seems, but for me, now you're not even worth my attention," which I guess could imply that Garou is on a completely different level to Blast, who knows. But I would say they're pretty much around the same strength, maybe. I'm not too sure. We need to see them fight for longer, but unfortunately we do not get that in this chapter. But moving on, we see that Garou after this straight up just, you know, goes in to attack and kill Genos because he wants to, I guess, bring out Saitama's full strength and get him back to the battlefield. And he straight up just like punctures right through Genos' chest. And we see that Garou just pretty much maybe just killed Genos here, who knows. And we see that Saitama finally arrives to the battlefield in this cool double spread with, like, you know, it has very dark palettes and a lot of just dark colors here, and it looks pretty cool. And in the next panel we see like Saitama with this scary looking impression of his, or expression on his face, whilst he's looking straight at Garou, just in complete shock as blood is flying down, or I guess coming down on his face. And we see that Garou says, "Aren't you a bit late?" And he throws Genos' core at Saitama's hand as he catches it. And Saitama just thinks back to all of the things he's done with Genos, and he says, "I usually arrive too late." And he asks himself, do I really have a hero's intuition? Sure doesn't seem like it. And these are Saitama's words as he shows an expression that we never really see Saitama show, which is, I guess, just pure seriousness. And I guess this is just the beginning of Saitama versus Garou properly now. And in the next panel, we see him use a killer move, serious punch. But Garou manages to use Saitama mode and also uses a serious punch, and they are both about to connect. And in the final panel, we see Blast say, "This is bad, the earth will be shattered." And that is the end of the chapter. Now, this chapter, once again, as I said, is a 10 out of 10. And I doubt I will make another video following up this, but in the future, I definitely will, because I am working on a big video right now. So I probably won't have enough time. But to summarize what I think about the things, or the major things in this chapter, first of all, Blast might be not as strong as we thought, but kind of still living up to some sort of expectation. I do still think Blast is kind of like God level, or very close to God level. Next, I do think that in the next chapter we will probably see, you know, surprise, I do think we will see Garou survive this, or at the very least maybe just not take as much damage as Boros, of course, because I don't think Garou will die in the next chapter. I do think Garou will survive this, and we will see Saitama face his strongest opponent, which of course is Garou. We still have to see the serious table flip, serious headbutt, etc. So I do think this is not the end of Garou just yet, even though this serious punch does look a lot more serious than the serious punch he used against Boros. So, you know, who knows? Who knows? Maybe in the next chapter we might just see Garo just straight up die. Who knows? But apart from that, that's pretty much all I have to say. This chapter was peak fiction, and apart from that, I'll see you in my next video.